This is part 2 of our Introduction to World Religions. Welcome back. In this lecture, we're going to talk a little bit about things that make up religion. We'll talk about symbols and myths and rituals. We'll also talk about what the book calls religious responses, which is to say theories of religion, different methods of studying religion. So I hope you find it interesting. In this first page, I've included 3 different pictures. These pictures come from 3 different religious traditions, 3 different religions, but they're all doing the same thing. But they're all doing it a little bit differently as well. As you can guess, the thing that they're all doing is praying, right? These 3 different pictures are people praying. Why do people pray? Well, in the first lecture, we talked about this idea of the unseen, that there is something else, something beyond what our eyes can see, what our hands can touch, what we can hear, what we can smell, what we can taste. There's an unseen reality out there. A lot of what religion does is it tries to allow people to understand it, but also to commune with it. By commune, I mean connect with it, to communicate, to make some sort of connection with the unseen reality. And prayer is probably the one of the most universal rituals done to form this communion. This picture here, these women who are at a Japanese shrine, they're Shinto. They have their heads bowed, they have their hands up in a show of respect, in a show of humility towards the kami, which is the gods, the spirits. Their eyes are closed because they're concentrating on what they're doing. Oftentimes you see people, when they pray, they close their eyes so they're not impacted by what they see. They're not impacted by the seen. They're trying to connect to what is unseen. So they try to block out all other distractions. They find quiet places, or they might listen to devotional music or chanting or other things, other ways of connecting them to that unseen reality. And again, each woman here is praying by herself. She is alone with her thoughts. Each of these women are alone with their thoughts, even though they stand next to one another. And again, they're showing a lot of humility. In this picture here, these 3 women are praying with one another. You can tell that by the way the way they're holding hands, right? This prayer that they're doing is a prayer that's all together. Even though each of them has their eyes closed and their mouths closed, they're not speaking their prayers, and yet all of their prayers is one prayer going up to the unseen. This man here is a rabbi. He's a Jewish leader called a rabbi. And the rabbi leads worship services at synagogues, which is the Jewish place of worship. And he's praying over this large item. This is actually a scroll. It is a scroll that contains the entire Torah, which is, the Torah, which is the Jewish scripture, right? As it was written thousands of years ago, it was written out on a scroll, and it rolled up. It wasn't written on pages in a book the way we do today. It was written on a scroll. So they still have these handwritten scrolls in each synagogue with the Torah in it, in the original Hebrew. And it's so sacred, it's so special that no one's allowed to touch it. So you can see there's this wrapping around it, this black velvet covering with symbols on it, and they hang from the front this silver plate that has the 10 Commandments on it, right? And he's praying over the Torah. So here he's using an item. A lot of times within religions, we use things to help make that unseen more tangible. They're things that we touch. They're things that we look at. They're things that we listen to, like songs or chanting or messages. We read, we look at images and icons and idols and all these different things. We hold things. A lot of times within religious services, they have incense. Right, that sense of smell that makes you feel as though you're in a different space, to try and get you to that place where you can commune with the unseen. So 3 different groups of people are doing 3 very different things, and yet doing, the exact same thing. Shinto, Christian, and Jewish. The goals for this lecture: we'll talk about the theories of scientific materialism, functionalism, and the faith perspective. These 3 theories are what the book call religious responses. We'll talk about symbols today and their purposes within religious traditions. So we'll start with the theories. Theories of religion seek to explain the existence and purpose of religion in the world. A lot of people come to studying religion. They say, why does religion exist? What does it do for people? A lot of different, why do people think that there's a divine? Why do we create entire institutions around those ideas? For psychological reasons, to give people comfort, sociological reasons, to help bind societies together with similar philosophies and ideas, philosophical reasons, spiritual reasons, all sorts of different reasons people think religion exists. We'll look at three main categories of theories. The first is scientific materialism. It's kind of the most simplest to wrap your head around, I would say, of the three. Scientific materialism says religion is created. It's created by people. Only the material world is real. Right? So scientific materialism would say that religion is not, or that the foundations of religion, this idea of the unseen and these other sorts of values are not real. Only the material world is real. The most famous scientific materialism, you might have heard of him, is Karl Marx. He famously said that religion is the opiate of the masses. And he said that it's the sigh of the oppressed creature, which is to say that within this world, the material world, there are people who have more power and there are people who have less power. People with more power oppress the people with less power. And the way they try to explain it, or the way they try to keep the oppressed happy, is by saying, well, in the next world, you'll have something better. Or there's something else besides this material world. So don't worry about the fact that you're oppressed in this world. This is a very cynical view of religion, of organized religion. Ludwig Feuerbach was a famous philosopher in the 19th century. He believed that religion was a projection of human qualities onto the world, which is to say that he thought that prehistoric human beings, early human beings, looked at the world, had a sense of anxiety about the world, long before we had, modern industrialization and technology. People looked at the world and they were at its whim. If there was a storm, their lives would be endangered. If they couldn't find food, their lives would be endangered. Also different reasons why the world was frightening to early human beings. And so Feuerbach said that people tried to understand these concepts of like the wind, of nature, of the stars, and they tried to understand them like they were people themselves, right? If a storm came and destroyed your home, it was that the sky was angry at you. So the sky became like a human being, right? It could experience anger. It had feelings and thoughts and performed actions based upon those feelings and thoughts. So Feuerbach thought that it was just human beings trying to understand the universe and projecting ideas onto these sorts of things onto the universe. In general, scientific materialism argues that religion is illusion at best and delusion at worst. Again, it has a pretty cynical view of religion, but it would argue that religion is not, the ideas behind religion are not true. So that's the first theory. And again, scientific materialism would try to understand why people would want to make religion. If it wasn't true, why would they want to make it, right? The functional perspective, on the other hand, argues that religion is functions in the world. It's useful. Religion is helpful. The functional perspective does not try to argue whether the supernatural or the unseen reality is real or not. Okay? The faith perspective, which we'll look at next, argues that it is real. Scientific materialism says it's not real. The functional perspective says we don't know, we don't care. That's not the point. The point of the functional perspective is to say, what does it do for people? How is it useful and helpful to people? Because if it wasn't helpful, then it wouldn't exist. Sociologically and psychologically, you create institutions and ideas and philosophies to help you function in the world. So how does it function? Well, most would say it makes us better in some way. Emil Durkheim, the famous sociologist, the father of sociology, thought that religion helps hold society together. So it's not about individuals, who are trying to feel better about themselves. It's about groups of people, entire communities, families, societies, who share the same philosophies, the same principles, the same ethics and codes of conduct through religion, and that way religion was like this glue that holds people together. Modern political scientists Robert Putnam and David Campbell argue that religion exists because it teaches kindness towards others. They did a survey, they did a census, and they discovered that people who identify with a religion, which is to say people who are members of a religion, are more likely to be compassionate towards others, are more likely to participate in charities, are more likely to try to forgive, to try and love people who are difficult to love. So they argued that, okay, religion exists in order to teach us kindness. The Dalai Lama, who is a great Buddhist leader, a religious man himself, believes that religion exists because it helps us overcome our tendencies towards destructive emotions. So religion teaches people how to deal with anger, with hatred, with other emotional reactions that are destructive. That's very much true of Buddhism. Buddhism is as a religious tradition, is very much interested in helping people deal with those sorts of emotional reactions. Sigmund Freud, the psychologist, father of psychology, could have fit very easily into the scientific materialism, but I put him in functionalism. He believed that religion is a universal obsessional neurosis based on insecurity. What does that mean? Well, similar to Feuerbach, what he's saying is that human beings are universally insecure and anxious, right? We're constantly in fear of dying, of suffering, of losing what we love, and that so afraid are we that we human beings as a whole have created this neurosis, this mass delusion that there can be this unseen reality, this God, this heaven, this whatever it is, spirit world that can help you with all your problems in this world, right? So it's just this gigantic obsessional neurosis that helps people deal with their insecurities and makes them feel confident enough that they're being watched over by something else, that they can go about their daily life without being afraid. Again, Freud could have fit into scientific materialism, but he could also fit into the functional perspective. And I bring this up only because I want you to keep in mind that these three groupings, scientific materialism, functional perspective, and faith perspective, are not mutually exclusive, right? They overlap in a lot of ways. In general, though, functional perspective would say that religion answers our questions about life with dogma. Dogma means a set of doctrines, a set of beliefs, right? Every religion has some sort of dogma. It says this is what the unseen reality is, this is what it does, this is what you should do, and how you should act accordingly, to be in harmony with it, to make it happy, to be in communion, to make a relationship with it, whatever. It's dogma. I pulled this quote from the book. I really liked it. It's from a Hindu teacher named Jiddu Krishnamurti. And it says that it appears that throughout the world, man has always been seeking something beyond his own death, beyond his own problems, something that will be enduring, true, and timeless. He has called it God. He has given it many names. And most of us believe in something of that kind without ever actually experiencing it. So the point of this is that religion, the functional perspective is saying that religion is universal. And because it's universal, that says something about it. It's useful. Whether or not it's real, whether or not you experience it, it's useful to people, and that's why it exists. The final perspective is the faith perspective. The faith perspective says that religion is a human response to the unseen reality. So the faith perspective would say there is an unseen reality. And what religion is, it's human beings reacting to that. Human beings in some way sense the unseen and they react to it. They try to understand it. They come up with explanations for it. They come up with institutions to commune with it or to worship it or to be in harmony with it, whatever. And it's very much based on the great psychologist William James, whom I mentioned in the last lecture, who's a psychologist and also a religious philosopher, who did believe that there is some sort of unseen, right? But that he also believed that it was ultimately unknowable. We can never know for certain what the unseen is. We know is that this religion thing is something, is some way of trying to respond to that, trying to connect with it in some way. And from the faith perspective comes this idea of mysticism. This is an important word. I want you to keep it in mind, write it down, underline it. I'm going to talk a lot about mysticism in this course. Every major religion has mystics. Mysticism is a first-hand ecstatic encounter with the divine, with the unseen, right? Within evangelical Christian churches, they might talk about having a born-again experience, right? They encounter God firsthand, and it's ecstatic. It's a mystic experience. Within other traditions like Zen Buddhism, mysticism is when a person might sit in meditation and all of a sudden they come to understand the reality of things. They become enlightened and they understand what the unseen is, what its truth is. And they connect to it on a more cerebral, on a more intellectual level. But nonetheless, they encounter it. And it's this great experience. Every religion has people who seek out mystic experiences through meditation, through prayer, through, this and that. There are people who dedicate their whole lives to trying to pursue those mystic experiences, like monks and nuns, like yogis, like, all sorts of different people, very devoted people who want to commune with the unseen, person to person. And so, a lot of religious theorists, modern religious theorists, would say that based upon those experiences, people start building religions. They start trying to recreate those experiences. They just start to try to use those experiences to understand what's on the other side of the veil, as the Celts might say, and to get a picture of it in their minds and to teach others about it and to create these communal experiences for that. This sort of faith perspective kind of sees the world in this kind of dualistic manner, though. Sees the world in terms of the sacred versus the secular or the profane. Right? The sacred is everything that's related to religion, and the profane or the secular is everything that's not related to religion. In my mind personally, and people can disagree, but in my mind personally, this is maybe the weakness of the faith perspective, is that it tries to divide the world divide the world up so neatly, sacred, not sacred, because we'll see in a lot of religions that line is not clear at all. In Hinduism, the line between what is sacred and what is not is very much blurred. But nonetheless, it's essentially how the faith perspective looks at the world. There are many different religious perspectives, many different theisms that come out of the faith perspective. Theism, which is the idea that there is a God of some kind or gods of some kind without being specific about it. Monotheism is what you might be familiar with. The monotheism is the idea that there is a God, there's only one God. Mono means one. There's one God. Polytheism, that there are many gods. Non-theism, like Buddhism and Jainism, which would say there are no gods. There's an unseen, but that has nothing to do with there being gods. It's more about spirit and realms and things like that. There's agnosticism, which is the idea that either someone is undecided or they just don't know. And then there's atheism, which is the idea that there is no theism, there's no God, there's no unseen at all, right? So there's a big difference here between non-theism and atheism, right? Non-theism says there's an unseen, but not necessarily gods. Atheism says there's neither an unseen nor any sorts of gods, none of it. So, and we'll see examples of all of these in this semester. So let's move on then. Let's talk about symbols. I love teaching about symbols. I find it just fascinating. How do you describe the ineffable? The ineffable means the thing that you can't see, the thing you can't touch, the thing you can't contact in any physical way. How do you describe that? How do you begin to deal with that? How do you begin to explain that, right? If people have these mystic encounters, these ecstatic encounters with something beyond the veil, how do they come back from that and try to explain it to other people? How do they teach it? How do they represent it? Answer is symbols. Very complex systems of symbols. 3 basic kinds of symbols we'll talk about today. First is the most basic one, the idea of images that represent complex beliefs and ideas. Myths, which are stories about religious foundations and identity that have deeper symbolic meaning to them. And rituals, which are actions that are symbolic in their nature, actions that allow followers to commune with the divine and participate in the doctrines and the myths. We'll talk about each of these in turn. So, symbols are very important in that they have always an underlying value. William James talked about this, that to a religious person, for example, they might see a cross. And someone who didn't know Christianity, someone who knew nothing about Christianity, would just see, just that sign, that symbol like this. It wouldn't mean anything. But for a Christian, they would look past just the symbol and they would see all this underlying, invisible, intangible value. What sorts of value? Well, the value of the story that it represents. This simple symbol has a very complex story about it, about the fall of Adam and Eve, and the sinfulness of all human beings, and human beings' redemption through this man, Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified on a giant cross like this one 2,000 years ago. So the religious person can see all this value behind the symbol, beyond it. But it's not just the story that it tells. It can have all sorts of different meaning to people. For one person, they might look at that cross and they might think of the story of Jesus. Another person might look at it and they might think of their local church, where they have a wide community, where they have a lot of friends, where they go every Sunday. Another person might look at it and they might think that they haven't been to church or they haven't lived the sort of life that they wish they had, and it might fill them with a little bit of anxiety or regret. Another person might look at that cross and they might think of their grandmother who used to take them to church when they were little and gave them a cross to wear around their neck. For some people, it is a deep religious conviction. For other people, it might be it might be very personal, right? So this simple thing, these two intersecting lines, that's all it is, just a T-shape, has all of this meaning, this underlying invisible value to it. And that's what symbols do. They help describe and explain ideas that are beyond words. There's another symbol you might be familiar with, the yin-yang. I see this on tattoos a lot. That's why I used it. I think this symbol is very interesting because it is an Eastern symbol. It comes from China, and it comes from the religion tradition Taoism, which we'll talk about in a couple months. And what it represents is balance, not between good and evil. A lot of times Westerners look at religion and they think in terms of good and evil. Taoism is not interested in good and evil. It's interested in balance. It sees the world and it says nothing in the universe is altogether good or altogether bad. It's all combination. It's a combination of energies. It's about dominance and submission. It's about light and dark, cold and hot. But it's not about good and evil. What the symbol represents is that you need both. You need the darkness and the light. And you need a balance of the two in order to have a harmonious life, to have a good life. So that's what this represents. See, a lot of Westerners have tattoos of this yin-yang, and I often wonder if they know what it means to the Chinese. The person who gets it tattooed here, it has its own meaning to them. It has its own underlying value to it. But traditionally what it means is just balance between all the different influences in your life. The symbols, though, can have a lot more than just teaching value. They can have a lot of really strong emotional value as well. You familiar with the symbol? It looks a lot like a swastika, doesn't it? Swastika being the symbol that the Nazis used on their arms, back during World War II. Well, this is a swastika, in fact. This is a Buddhist swastika. What you might not know about the swastika is that it's actually an ancient Hindu symbol. Thousands and thousands of years before the Nazi Party ever had its rise, the ancient Hindus used this symbol. And it is commonly used today in Hinduism and Buddhism and Jainism, it represents balance, similar to what the yin yang means. It symbolizes the tree of life. It symbolizes the wheel of life. And it's often an auspicious sign, which is just to say it's often just a sign of good luck. Hindus often put this symbol outside their homes as just a symbol of good luck. And they use it a lot during holidays, we'll see. Just again, a good luck symbol. Buddhists use it all the time. They put it on their temples. If you ever go to a Buddhist country and you look at a tourist map, the Buddhist temples on the map are almost always marked by a swastika. As for them, it's a swastika. It has nothing to do with Nazi Germany. It means nothing. The whole Nazi party means nothing to them. The Nazi Party, on the other hand, saw this. They saw this ancient symbol and was trying to make the argument that they were part of this ancient race of human beings called the Aryans, and that they were superior to all other people. They were the oldest people, the best people in the world. And they appropriated this symbol, and they put it on their arms, and they put it on their flags to try and say that something about themselves, that they were the oldest, that they were the best. But meanwhile, even today, Hindus and Buddhists and Jains still use it. Here's an image of a large Buddhist statue. You can see there's a swastika on the Buddha's chest. A lot of times for Buddhists too, it represents the Dharma wheel, which we'll talk about more in coming weeks. You notice that this swastika is going in one direction. The spokes are going in one direction. This one's going in another direction. This one has dots. This one doesn't. But it's all the same thing. It's all the same thing with for Hindus and Buddhists. So it's fascinating to me that for us, for Americans, you see a swastika and it has this, you'll have this extreme reaction against it as something awful, as something evil. But in fact, it has this whole other meaning in the other part of the world. And all it is just a couple of intersecting lines, right? That's the power of symbols. That's why we use them. Next kind of symbol we're going to look at are myths. Now, I know what you're going to say. Most people think of the word myth and they think that it means like a falsehood, like it's either true or it's a myth. The fact of the matter is that's not what the word myth means, not to religious studies scholars anyway. The word myth comes from the Greek word mythos, muthos actually, which means speech, story, word of mouth. A myth is a story, not just any kind of story. Myth is a story that gives a religion its foundations and its identity, right? It's an important religious story that helps explain why things are. This idea that myth means a lie or myth means it's not true, it's a rumor, it's actually a very new way of interpreting that word that comes from like the 19th century. Only less than 200 years has it been used in that way. It's not its traditional meaning. So in this class, I'll talk about myths of different religions. I'll talk about Christian myths, Hindu myths, Tao myths, Muslim myths. And it has nothing to do with whether or not I think they're true or not. It just is saying something about its importance, these stories' importance to their religions. Myths have many different functions. They function in mystical ways by helping people understand the unseen better and commune with it. Cosmological functions by teaching how things came to be. Sociological and psychological functions by teaching people what they're supposed to do and what's important in their day-to-day lives. I'll use the example of the story of the crucifixion of Jesus, which I assume many of you are already familiar with, right? Jesus of Nazareth was, according to the Christian myth, was the Son of God, who was made incarnate, was made man here on earth, and went around teaching and healing and trying to get people to follow the straight and narrow, essentially. And he gained some political enemies who were worried that he was a rebel, a traitor to the Roman Empire, and so he was crucified. He was executed in the Roman style of being nailed to a cross. It was a Roman execution that he went through. And so this is a really famous myth, a myth that's told again and again and again, and acted out in rituals and all these different things, and it has many different functions. Cosmologically, right? In terms of what it teaches us about the way the world is. It teaches people that they can be redeemed from their sinfulness. When they do wrong, when they sin or are wicked or evil, there is redemption that is available through the actions of Jesus Christ, through this story, right, of what happened. It has mystical functions, and that for many people, Christians who hear the story, it's a very emotional story, and it creates for them a connection to the divine, right? It tells them about their personal relationship with the divine, and it creates a communion. It creates a mystical encounter sometimes. Sociologically, it teaches people about the importance, it teaches communities about the importance of being good to one another. Psychologically, it can give people a sense of comfort to know that despite their downfalls, that they won't be judged for it, right? It has all these different functions, right? So these myths are not just stories, they're not just events that happened. They have all these other values behind them. Very important values that help make up what the religions are. And that way they're symbolic and they carry symbols in them. And then finally, rituals. I love studying rituals too. I love studying symbols, I love studying rituals. Rituals are symbols in action, right? Rituals are people acting out, symbolically acting out important dogma, myths, and other aspects of their religion. And they allow followers to commune with the divine through these sorts of symbols, through metaphor. And they allow people to participate in all of these ideas of the unseen reality, right? Through singing, through reciting stories, by giving offerings, listening to lessons, acting out stories. Parade. In the first lecture, we saw a picture of Hindu men carrying the goddess Durga throughout the city. Allows people to encounter the goddess on a daily basis, right? That's very symbolic, to be able to come out your front door and see the goddess there in front of you. It's a reminder that that the gods and the goddesses are everywhere. They're all around you. They're not just in the temples. So rituals are symbol put into action, right? They're actions with real value behind them. Let's look at a specific example. I'm pulling a lot of Christian examples today, aren't I? Again, I assume a lot of people might already be familiar with Christianity. This is the ritual of communion, also known as the Eucharist. The myth that they're acting out is that of the Last Supper, which is the last meal that Jesus shared with his disciples before he was crucified, right? So they're acting out this story in which Jesus offered his disciples bread and wine, and he basically told them that he was to die soon. And he said, "This bread is my body broken for you. This is my blood. This wine is my blood. It's shed for you," right? For the forgiveness of sins. This is how Christians interpret this myth and why it's so important. So they act it out over and over again. For many Christians, they do this every Sunday at church. They act out the story over and over again. They come, first they come to church, they sit in the pews, they worship and pray, they listen to the story, and they go to the front of their chapel, the church. Oftentimes they kneel and they receive the bread and wine or juice that are symbols of this story, or symbols of the Last Supper. So they're acting it out, they're participating in it. The story isn't just on paper, and it's not just in the mouths of the people who say it. It's something that they do. And they bring that out into their daily lives then, that knowledge that Jesus loved everyone so much that he was willing to die for them. They take out the confidence that the unseen cares for them, right, and cares for their lives, that they be saved from their sins, and so on and so forth. So rituals have these really powerful connotations, and in each religion we look at, we're going to look at the symbols of each religion, its myths and its rituals. And I hope that you keep these ideas in mind as we're looking at each religion. What symbols does each religion use? What myths does it tell? What rituals does it do? What rituals is it most important for followers to participate in? They're very important things. And yeah. So with that, I'll end this lecture. The discussion question for this lecture is to think about the three basic approaches to religious studies we looked at. We looked at scientific materialism, functionalism, and the faith perspective. What are the advantages of each perspective? So for each scientific materialism, functionalism, faith perspective, which advantages does each one have? This is a big question, right? The first question this week was a really easy one. The second one's a really hard one. The third one this week is going to be hard too. They won't always be this hard. But we have a lot to talk about this week. We have to set up the rest of the semester with these discussion questions. So they're big questions. Give it some thought. What are the advantages of each perspective? And do you think people depend on just one, or can all three perspectives kind of work together? Can people depend on more than one perspective to explain why religion exists and what it does? Can you be a functionalist and have faith perspective? Can you be scientific materialist and have functionalism? Can scientific materialism and the faith perspective ever get along? These are all very important questions. So think about these things. Answer the questions. I look forward to reading your answers. Email me if you have any questions or problems at all.